Hey, folks. I'm Brett Kinsella. This is another episode of GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. Well, actually, almost every week. But we've done a lot of them this year. And what we're going to break down is Grok is out. Google Gemini is out. We have news from Snapchat, from Mastercard. Microsoft has their own large language model that competes maybe with some of the things OpenAI has. All of the big tech and the startups are trying to get a flurry of announcements in before the end of the year as we close what has really been a momentous year. And to break it all down, I have my colleague Eric Schwartz with me. Hey, Eric, how are you doing?
Good. Excited to cover everything going on in the world of generative AI.
Yeah, perfect. We have a lot to cover today, and I'll just give a shout out to everybody on LinkedIn and YouTube for joining us today. Feel free to comment and break in anywhere you want. And I thought we would just start off with the biggest story of the week, and that's Gemini. And so Google Gemini, it's the new LLM. It replaces Palm, and it has three different, actually there's four different models because there's two small ones, really small ones as well. The largest one, Ultra, not available, but looks kind of amazing. Some of the videos, we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. The Pro model is the one that's out now, and you can use it in Vertex AI. I've already talked to some people who have been playing with it. And then we have the small models, the Nano for running on devices. So just in terms of Gemini, what struck you about the language model and what you thought was really the most significant about the announcement?
I think it's pretty clear that Google really wants Gemini to be the spine of all of their products. It's not just a generative AI model for one thing. It is part of what they're offering developers. It's part of what they're offering consumers through many products. It's they're really seeing it as the foundation for everything they're going to be building for the next several years at least, and that's why they have different models. That's why they're taking a sort of flexible approach to it. They want to be able to say anything OpenAI and Microsoft does, we can do, but maybe better. Anything Amazon does, anything Meta does, we can do and better. And we've talked about how they were a little slow off the mark this year when it came to generative AI, but they're making up for lost time and what they lacked in speed. They're trying to go for depth instead.
Yeah, maybe. And it's really been almost exactly 1 year since Sundar Pichai issued the code red because of ChatGPT, and what he saw is a potential threat to their business. And you know what? He was right. And they actually, the news of that didn't come out for a few weeks, but within 2 weeks, really in January, and people started talking about it, but within 2 weeks, Google understood that ChatGPT was kind of a phenomenon, and they were on their back foot. I don't think they knew how significant it would be in the first quarter, not with ChatGPT, but also with GPT-4 coming, and how much further behind they had fallen. So it's basically a year later, and they have almost a competitive model to GPT-4. They have a competitive model, looks like, to GPT 3.5, and we'll pull up on the screen some of the data here. So if you look at these, many of the standard benchmarks that people do in order to say how good are these general purpose models, we have a list of them here. Just so you know, I think everyone kind of gets this. Everyone who puts out a large language model, a foundation model, they cherry pick the test that they want to run. And now there's some that you'll see almost every time, MMLU and GSM-8K are a couple of examples. But across the board, they're just like different all the time. Everyone has their own basket that they like to focus on, usually the one that makes them look best. But in any event, what you can see here is that Gemini Ultra, which is not available yet, supposedly in January, but like everything's been late, so who knows, is better on this whole list. Now, what they say is that Gemini Ultra, which is their top LLM now, outperforms GPT-4 on 30 of 32 benchmarks, which is a lot. And so even if you're cherry picking, that's a lot of benchmarks in order to do better. Now, Gemini Pro does not, but it does do better than GPT 3.5 in almost everyone. And then they show some of the other ones. They show Palm, which is their existing one, Claude, Inflection. This is all about the race to be viewed as the alternative to OpenAI. And it might be that Gemini is really compelling. And I think that that's the story that should have happened, right? They should have just released this.
Yeah.
But they also put a bunch of marketing videos, and the marketing videos were kind of amazing. And I have to say that I did a story really just focused on the large language models first thing. I was going to do a follow-up the next day or 2 days later on the videos, because the video demonstrations are showing things. Some things like Fairly are already in GPT-4, but I think they were maybe a little bit more elegantly displayed by Google in their videos. And there were some things that were novel. One in particular was extremely novel, but that what we found out subsequently was it was edited, and it was fairly heavily edited. And so was it faked? Yes, actually. It wasn't just edited. They talked about it being edited for speeding it up and those types of things. But there was a couple of elements that actually they had to type in the response. So yeah, and it's aspirational. This is what it could do. And that would be perfectly fine if they said, this is where we're headed, right? If they just been, this is where we're going to go, that would have been fine. But they didn't. They just sort of laid it out there. There was a disclaimer in the YouTube video that's basically said, this has been edited, but they didn't really tell anybody that. It was kind of buried. And then it calls into question all of the other things that they did. The other videos are also pretty powerful. It just seems like marketing, it's an unforced error. And it's fine. If they'd done everything, if they just released the model and then they brought these out this week when they actually showed the stuff, it would have been great. Or if they'd said this was aspirational and had the videos, it would have been great. They're trying too hard, and it's overwhelming what looks like some really impressive engineering.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a space where reality and the question of synthetic origin is sort of central to the entire industry. Having that sort of editing without, as you said, without having just be a disclaimer of or saying it's aspirational does make it seem less trustworthy overall. And you sort of understand why they're doing it, partly because they had they sort of tripped over their own feet with Bard when they first announced it, when they tried to do a live demonstration and had a hallucination pop up just from that. But it's one of those things where the blurring of the line between editing just to make to clarify what it can do versus editing to make it look better than what it can do, they should have definitely erred on the side of less impressive, more accurate.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into that because, okay, so let's just put that aside. Google marketing has made a couple of unforced errors here. I think they don't get the moment. And I also believe that that's a leadership issue. They think they're maybe in a different moment in time, or, and I think there's some hubris there as well. It's like Google they don't want to admit that they were maybe behind in some ways, at least the applied aspect of it, because Google engineers did attention is all you need, which was really the spark that, catalyzed a lot of the things that we're doing right now. That research paper is from them. BERT was really the first significant manifestation of these technologies, the BERT large language model. And so just right along, they've had a lead, and now it's perceived they don't have a lead. And in fact, I think in reality, they do not. They're behind. And I think they're behind on not just mind share and market share, but also in technology, because they don't understand where the market is.
Yeah, and especially because generative AI is itself so new in terms of its current form, the difference between technical tests for developers and marketing videos for the average consumer, they're going to the same people now, and it's an odd kind of like, what is an ad and what is a scientific study are kind of now the same thing.
What is? Yeah, that's a really interesting point, right? Because all of the research reports, and we'll talk about this a little bit with Microsoft, are really just trying to position it like people are reading archive. They're reading like the research papers, and this is a very unusual thing. I can't really, now that I think about it, like you and I have read them right along because like we always have to figure out what's going on in the industry, but I'm not really sure there's been a time when so many people have read these things and so many research papers have been put out, which are explicitly for positioning, not just for sharing what they learned.
Yeah, the educated layman is a lot more educated on technical things now than they were when people were bragging about powerful computers in the early 1990s.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, let's get back to like the crux here of what's going on. So they did do their formal launch a couple days ago, and that included access to Gemini Pro, but they also have Studio out. And you wrote a story about that and overall sort of where we are with it. Give us an update.
Yeah, it actually sort of fits perfectly into what we were just saying, because Google Vertex is a very popular, well-known and widely used platform for developers. And there had been this other tool, Maker Suite, that is now AI Studio. And it honestly seems to be designed to let people play around, playground to explore Gemini Pro, to have opportunity to spend either for a while no money or not a lot of money before taking the plunge and saying, okay, everything in my business now will be Google and Gemini based, and I'm signing up for every Google Cloud product at some point, which again is still using Gemini Pro or using Gemini in various models. So it seems to be, as we were saying, it's like everything about Google now is going to be based on Gemini, and they want to make it as easy and frictionless as possible for anyone in any sort of business or even consumer level to play around and get comfortable with what they offer, because they don't want people to think first of ChatGPT the way that people do right now.
Yeah, I heard from Alan Furstenberg that he likes Studio better than Vertex. I still can't understand why Studio exists other than it's free and maybe slightly easier to use if you're a developer. But like anything you really want to do significantly with these requires Vertex. If you want to fine tune it, if you want to use a RAG, any of the other things. Now, they did add a bunch of things to Vertex as well. Vertex AI is really their dashboard. I don't think these are both going to survive. I think Vertex, I think Studio's, it's like
I think a little bit of Studio.
Essentially what it is, it's like if people haven't seen it, it's like the OpenAI assistant API playground, right? Yep. It's essentially a playground, which is great. It's just like, but we're moving into production area. And so why not just start with Vertex is my view.
Yeah. It's like, if all you need to do is crop a photo, then Microsoft Paint is fine. But if you actually need to engage with the more complex elements of photo editing, then yeah, you need Photoshop or something like it.
All right, we have a comment from Katie McMahon. Hey, Katie, what is an ad and what is a scientific research paper? I mean, that is a problem, but she also said, when a breakthrough cannot be validated by third parties, that's a big issue. And I think that's really where we are.
Being kind of that.
Yeah, because like I've been doing a lot of work around benchmarking because I thought that this was going to be a really significant thing as people like try to decide if they're going to move into production. I can't just like choose the first LLM I fell in love with. I really should evaluate some of these. These are multi-million-dollar decisions for most of these organizations, tens of millions for some. And because the proprietary models don't share model weights or probabilities, mostly, there's some movement to change that. You can't actually run these benchmarks independently. You just have to take their word for it. And then what about the things that they didn't, put out there? And we'll talk about that with Mistral. There was one that they sort of, for some reason, didn't report, which is interesting. But what I should say is, welcome everybody. If you just joined late, let us know you're out there. Just like say who you are and like where you're from or something like that in the comments on LinkedIn and YouTube. Also ask questions, make comments. We like that. We'll incorporate them into the discussion. But I think that's probably it for Google right now. I'll just say in terms of a forecast, I assume Ultra is going to be very good. I don't think Google's hubris is so much that they're blind to like what's good and what's not. And some of the things that they showed in the demos that I think are true are also very impressive. And I think at the very least, it gets them to parity. with OpenAI. It might be that it's not as good as GPT-5, which we'd expect sometime in the end of the first half of 2024. But it might be better because the multimodal from the beginning, I think, is fairly significant. Whether we need the Swiss Army knife or not is like a completely different question for another day. But I think I think it got them to the point where they need to be. It just took them a year to get there.
Yeah, I think because I think it wasn't arrogance so much as almost a laziness and a belief that they didn't need to try, and now they know they need to try.
Wow, mic drop. That's the last word on that one. All right. Let's move into the funding fountain range. There's a lot of funding stories. We're going to spend a little bit more time on the first one, part because it's really big, but there's a lot of other things going on here. So Mistral, if you haven't heard about Mistral, here's your introduction. You're going to hear a lot more about them. Open source is the first thing that you need to think about from that standpoint. Europe is the second. Those are the two main angles that people are talking about. They're like, okay, who's going to be the OpenAI of Europe? My contention is that OpenAI is already the OpenAI of Europe because it seems to be everywhere. But okay, it's not to say that there aren't startups doing great things. And Mistral is one of them that's doing something really big. Now, they landed $415 million in new funding. That's on top of, what was it, 113 that they raised in June?
Yeah.
Okay, so a company that was founded in the first quarter of this year has raised $500 million. And they have, up until a couple of days ago, they had one model to show for it, which is a small large language model. I think we're starting to work on that nomenclature a little bit. Satya Nadella likes to call them SLMs, small language models, but there are smaller ones. In any event, so it's 7 billion parameters, but they have the bigger news, I think, is not that they could get funding because it's like a great team and everything, but they have a new model. And it's Mistral 8x7B, which is different than what you would normally see in terms of the namings of these things. The 8x7B is actually a collection of 8 different models, all 7 billion parameters. And it's what's called a mixture of experts model. And we'll give you like a visual here so you can see. There's the team from Mistral, a very small team out of Paris, but Mistral 8x7B. So here's a couple things about it. The mixture of experts model is what most people believe that GPT-4 is based on. So it's multiple models together, and there's an efficiency element to it, and that's why Mistral is really focused on this, because it's smaller models, even up to, as they scale them, cost efficiency is like a big angle for them. But they can basically, because they have multiple models, they can do parallel processing. And 32,000 K token context window, multilingual, and you can do fine tuning on it. So all those things I think are pretty impressive. We also have, actually, I think I have some data here. Actually, I'll go down, and then I'll let you weigh in on this. Here's their benchmark data. So what are they comparing themselves against? They're not comparing themselves against GPT-4, which kind of makes sense. It's a small model and it's not a frontier model. But Llama 70B is sort of the king of the open source models. So 70 billion parameters. That's quite a bit bigger, but it's 8x7. So there's multiple models in there. And it looks like it's the winner in all but 2 of these in terms of performance. Very good for such a small model. It's going to cost a lot less. There's some more data here in the smaller table, which is going to be hard for people to see. The one thing I will say about this is they look really good from a technical standpoint. It looks really good from a cost efficiency standpoint. I think if look at this, just to give people a sense of what this is, the orange is Mistral, the red is Llama. And when you look at this, and I'm having a little trouble making it larger. There we go. In terms of its performance, Mistral gets there much faster in terms of total inference budget. So that's basically the compute cost, look at it that way. So even though Llama looks really competitive, if you just look at the raw scores, Mistral does it on a much more cost-efficient basis. And I think that's really good. So let's just start there. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the openness and the cost elements, and that's because I think it's not that Mistral thinks they're going to beat out OpenAI in Europe, but they might be able to beat out OpenAI with governments and more cautious companies. I think that's where they're aiming, and this kind of mix of experts system fits with that because it offers some of the power and specialization, I guess, at the same time, and that's definitely useful. But I think with Mixtral, it's a different approach from most of what we've seen, and we don't. There's so much that's still new about these benchmark tests that it's hard to say which one is important. That's why people do so many of them, because which is the most important one, which matters to you. And as we say, they left out one of the key ones because presumably it wasn't as positive. But I don't think that was necessarily a smart idea because it just sort of draws attention to, if they could say, one out of all these benchmarks.
It drew attention from me because I actually know what the tests are that people are normally reporting. I don't know that anybody else. I didn't see anyone else even write about it. But it's truthful. No, I think is the test. And just so people have context here, OpenLLM leaderboard. So this is by Hugging Face. It's for the open source community. This is like the central place that all the open source organizations really congregate. Mistral is open source from the start, partner with Hugging Face. They do work together on the Zephyr model. The OpenLLM leaderboard up until about a month ago had 4 core tests. Now they have 6. They just dropped one of them, and it was one of the original 4. It's Truthful QA. It's also the one where the models, before they're fine-tuned, tend to do the worst, particularly the small models. It's just like kind of a glaring error. So, I just sort of point that out, and that they look really impressive. They announced the model through a torrent link. That's all it was. It was a torrent link. And then like 4 days later, there was a blog post saying, oh, this is basically what it is. So it was like really good marketing, just the opposite of what we saw from Google Gemini. It looks really, so we can put that aside in terms of like, they didn't post something. I guess they don't do well in Truthful QA, which is like around hallucinations essentially. But it looks like an impressive model. And it looks like cost efficiency, smaller model, mixture of experts might be something that is a big story in 2024.
Yeah, and I think that the cost element is going to become a bigger piece as people get more comfortable with the technology itself and come to rely on it more. Then suddenly it's an issue of will this is it worth paying for? And if Mistral can say to especially more budget conscious enterprises, you won't have to pay as much and you will get either as good or almost as good a service as you would with Microsoft, then that's going to be a big selling point. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the other thing to really point out is that the 7B, they now call the original model that they put out in September, they call Tiny. They're calling the current Mixtral 8x7B medium, or no, small. And then they have a medium that they're working on. And they also launched a platform, basically an API, so that people get access to it now. They don't have to like just download it, but so they're going to serve it up to everybody off their own service. What that means is we're going to see some larger version of the new Mixtral model, the mixture of experts model, which should be even better. It might not be as good from a cost performance budget standpoint, but it should be better from a performance standpoint. And what that tells me is there's like a lot to come. If they're already like besting GPT 3.5 with their Mixtral 7B, 8x7B model, the next one might even be closer to GPT-4. That'll be fascinating to see.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out, I mean, these are veterans of Google DeepMind. So whatever it was that Google has been doing that they felt was not the direction that was the way to go. So that they went off and decided to do their own thing. I mean, it does show that they have the talent behind what they're doing to at least adapt as this market is changing. And I think that's what's making it one thing that's making investors feel comfortable about pouring so much cash into what they're working on.
Yeah, and I think two of them worked at Meta AI Research Lab as well. Mensch was from DeepMind, and the 3 founders. initials are L, L, and M, which was sort of fun. Okay, so let's move into more funding stories. Everyone pay attention to Mistral because they're going to be a really interesting story over the next year. There's so many angles that are cool. You wrote a story about our old friend SoundHound. They acquired, is it Sync 3?
Yeah, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, it's SoundHound, long time big player in the voice AI space, still going concern, a public company, and they bought a big restaurant AI service provider that will give them essentially open doors to thousands of restaurants and bring their platform and their services into more places. And I think that's going to be a key component of their business model, since the voice AI industry, as we understood it a year ago, is entirely different now.
Yeah, so I think that the operative term was that Sync 3 was already in 10,000 locations, which franchises, that might be like, could be just a couple of different franchise organizations, but still, that just should accelerate access to providing more services into those space. Seems like a good move on their part. I think there's a broader story about SoundHound not meeting their financial objectives this year, and not terrible generating revenue, but not making that switch to the new revenue model as fast as they indicated during their IPO. So I think there's still challenges there, but this looks like a good move.
Yeah, they're definitely not paralyzed by the changes. They're definitely trying to maneuver to stay ahead of them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you had another story about Assembly AI. So Assembly AI is an interesting company because they host models. They basically source models, open source models generally, from the market. They tune them. They provide them as basically a managed service. It's like a really interesting business model. They just raised another $50 million.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of changes in the voice AI world, Assembly AI was built around speech recognition, built around transcription, and summarization of voice conversations. And they have a new model that's designed to power third-party voice products. It's called a Conformer 2. And there's been a lot of demand for AI and generative AI tools that can handle the audio component, and I think that's a growing arena, and they will help out a lot of contact centers, a lot of customer services. They claim that their API is dealing with 25 million calls a day, so there's demand, and now they're able to handle even more of those calls every day.
Absolutely. And the founder of CEO and co-founder of Assembly AI was on the VoiceBot podcast about a year and a half ago. So if you guys want to know what the strategy was then, it's like not really that different now. You can go back and check that out. All right. So you had another story here about Sarvam, and they raised 41 million, and it's an LLM, I think, for Indian languages. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. It's obviously many of the stories or big trends are about the American companies and Chinese companies, and occasionally other countries, but India has a very large tech-savvy population. They were very quick to adopt a lot of voice AIs, as we've covered over the years, and there's going to be a demand for generative AI models that can do the same thing for the many languages spoken on the subcontinent. So that's what Sarvam's working on. They're trying to provide the same foundation of Indian language AI that existed for the sort of previous version of conversational AI, but now for the generative AI space we all exist in now.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. And one of the things that we've talked about is the likely trend going forward is going to be specialization. So we had the rise of the general purpose models, and that's what everybody was really focused on. And it's using those, then applying those to lots of different use cases. And now companies that are coming up are going to have to differentiate themselves. They're going to have to focus on something, a domain, a language, something else, because it's going to be harder and harder to like win that general purpose space. And I think this looks like really good strategy on their part. You had another story on Kognitos. They raised 20 million. Tell us about them.
Yeah. So again, it's just we talk about specialization, and Kognitos is part of the sort of enterprise focus. They work with businesses. They're interested in handling the kinds of tasks that come up in a business environment that don't come up necessarily in that don't you don't need everything that ChatGPT can do if you are only doing business analytics and business tools. So yeah, it's process automation. It's sort of that behind the scenes necessity that makes a company work, that makes a company able to function at the speed that the digital world demands. And companies that can do that are already servicing enterprises and now can say we have also generative AI, or we have the people who are building generative AI, they're going to get plenty of cash from investors.
Yeah, a couple of things about them too. I mean, they position themselves as NLP process automation. I think it is, the idea that you can automate processes. So that's interesting. They do focus on messaging around reducing hallucinations, but everybody does. I think their claims might be a little too strong because they're saying it's deterministic and that it's not going to have hallucinations, which tells me that it's actually not generative. But we'll see how it plays out. But this is a perfect example of specialization again, just along the automating routine tasks in the organizations. You had another story. It's a lot of funding stories coming up in the last couple of weeks. Kyron.
Yeah, and again, another perfect example of where there's demand within specific industries rather than just a one size fits all tool, and in this case, that's education. And Kyron's existed for a while. The idea was that you have teachers record videos of themselves answering questions or explaining things for students who are studying, and students can ask questions of a traditional conversational AI, and based on what they ask, it'll pull up the correct video. But now that's not enough because people know there's able to be more. So now the plan is to make generative AI part of that assistance. So wherever the teacher may not have made a video to answer a question, the generative AI can look through the teacher's notes and everything they've already recorded and put together a response that helps the student, even if their question didn't necessarily correspond exactly to whatever the teacher had recorded.
Yeah, I think this is an amazing use case. I hope they can pull it off because they're obviously fairly early stage, and I think when you start looking at all these different type of assets, it's going to take a lot. But if they can be successful, this is great because you think about some of the things that they're doing in asset management and what like Veritone is doing for media companies in order to being able to like mix together media, text, audio, image, in order to create something new out of it. That's really the promise of this space, the synthesis of things that already exist, but presenting them in a new way to answer novel questions is something I think people tend to overlook in this space. But to me, that's a big part of the magic.
Yeah. And I know we're going to touch on it next, but it's, once upon a time, an AI that could key up a relevant video just from what a student typed would have been considered an impressive advance in education. But now, obviously, we're moving well beyond that when it comes to synthetic media.
Oh, and that's another thing we didn't even talk about this from Gemini is it'll actually summarize videos for you. It'll extract information from videos. That was, Gemini, like the general thing where Ravi Kurian led it yesterday or 2 days ago for the Gemini launch was okay. I felt bad for him because he obviously wasn't feeling well and was coughing a lot. But in any event, he powered through. There was a session that there was a demo there, and there was a couple sessions afterwards, which I thought were actually more impressive. And as we go back through that, I mean, they were talking about things like it'll watch a video and it'll tell you what's going on in that video, or like he'd created something, and this I think was during the main session, where it uploaded a video, and basically he had a small program written. Basically, they're a real estate firm, and it basically created an ad or a home listing based on the video, and then he added out exterior photos and things like that, and then it updated the thing the listing based on the exterior photos as well. So those are really impressive. But another type of video is Heygen.
Yeah. Again, so as I was just saying, the synthetic media space, we've gone very quickly from wow, look at the text to image engine to wow, look at the vague description of a video to an entirely synthetic video with an avatar that sounds like a human, sounds like a specific human, looks like a specific human. And Heygen is part of that effort, in that what they're pushing for is very fast, very easy creation of a video avatar. So, if you film yourself with your phone for a couple minutes, and now you have a voice and visual clone that can say and do whatever it is you want it to do. And all you have to do is describe what the video is about, and the AI can insert that avatar into your video. And they describe how it's something that would have taken days at best, even a little over a year ago, to now just a few minutes. It's pretty impressive. They're not alone in this space, but it's definitely
how's it different than like a traditional virtual human company like Soul Machines or Hour One or somebody like that?
It's stripped down. It's the difference between a professional video camera and the camera on your phone, because it is exactly that. Instead of a professional photo shoot or several hours of recorded video, or even a few minutes of recorded,
just to create the avatar.
Yeah, that's all it said. And then once that's built into once that's added to your I guess your asset list, then it's very easy for them to insert it into the entirely synthetic video behind it. And we've talked before about how the enterprise space has a lot of demand for things that don't fit into the sort of one size fits all approach of something like ChatGPT. And this is exactly that. I mean, marketing, training, all the necessary but sometimes boring parts of a company. Instead of a big manual, you now have a customized video that can potentially even start talking back to you, as we've seen with some of the other ones. So it's not at the point of real-time interaction the way that like Soul Machines is, but it is at the very quickly getting to the point where instead of filming yourself for a YouTube or a TikTok video, you just describe what you want your character to be doing and upload it.
Perfect. That'll be the last word on that. Hey, so this is Gain, everybody, the Generative AI News Rundown. We get together every week and we talk about the top news in generative AI. The stories that we're talking about here today, most of them have appeared in voicebot.ai or Synthedia. So if you haven't consulted either, signed up for the newsletters and those fronts, you should do that. Maybe Andrew can put those in the description. If you missed part of this as well, you can watch all of our Gain sessions on YouTube afterwards at the VoiceBot YouTube channel. That's what is it? youtube.com/the@voicebot.ai. Okay. That is the funding fountain. What does funding go into? It goes into products. So we have the product garden. So let's talk about fee. So Microsoft has its own large language models. So this is a small LLM, they call it an SLM, small language model. Pretty interesting. Again, we see outpacing Llama 2. So we see Mistral talking about Llama 2. And again, we have a different set of benchmark tests to show how great Fee is. But Fee is a $2.7 billion model. So it's actually much closer to what Google Gemini Nano is. So much smaller, less computationally intensive to run, also to train. They did several different tests. One of the things I think is particularly interesting here is that common sense reasoning and language understanding is essentially a basket of tests. So there will be some that you would have seen in Mistral or Llama or something like that, but they basically do an average within, and then there's an overall average. It's sort of interesting. But it looks like a really capable model. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think Microsoft, did almost the opposite of Google in that, thanks largely to OpenAI, they have the sort of space to experiment with these sort of either narrowly tailored or smaller LLMs. I think we talk about what's the next step after people ask what can it do. They're going to ask, what does it cost? And if Microsoft can say, well, you don't have to spend as nearly as much as you would for the most powerful Azure AI models, you can instead buy this if you have either a small company or just less complex demands. And I think there's going to be plenty of people who are happy to pay less and thereby making Microsoft even more money.
Oh, did they call this FI or fee? I thought Satya referred to it as fee. On the
we were debating the Greek pronunciation. I definitely have heard it both. I always have thought it was FI, but it's very much could be fee.
Yeah, there's like a colloquial reason for it. Could be either way. We'll call it FI. And that'll compete with Zephyr, which is a Hugging Face on Azure. Zephyr is a Hugging Face version of Mistral 7B, and with the new Mistral, which we talked about earlier. So competition at the large language model general purpose solutions, very big in 2023. Looks like 2024 is set up for the small language model battle royale. There is another conversation, which is around Grok. Apparently that's been released. I don't have access to it yet. I signed up for it, got on the wait list, paid the day they announced it, which is over a month ago now. And still don't have access to it. Have you been able to access it?
I don't have it myself. I've heard from a couple of friends who do have access, and I've heard from others who say they don't, and they're actually a little annoyed about it because they're coming close up to a month since they first bought it specifically for Grok, and still don't have access to Grok. So they're gonna essentially paid a whole month for nothing.
I've really lost interest. I have to say, like, I was pretty excited. Like, give it to me a couple weeks ago. Like, I don't mind waiting a couple weeks. But if you do, basically, when they announced it, there was already a wait list. So they said it, and they wanted to do it around the time of the OpenAI Dev Day. Fine, there's a wait list. I'm on the wait list. But then they do another announcement and say it's released, but it's not actually released because I've been on the wait list since the first day they announced it.
I do wonder, these are anecdotal stories, obviously, but when Elon Musk announced it, he was talking about its personality and its sort of more sarcastic and deliberately humorous approach to interacting with people and less of the quote unquote professional language. But there was a lot of stories of people who wanted exactly that and felt that it was not doing that. So I wonder if there was a slowdown on the general release because some of the people who would normally be its biggest boosters were upset.
Then don't do another announcement that it's released and not give it to people. I mean, this is insane.
True. But this is also the man who announced a robot that he's building by sending out a human dressed as a robot.
Yeah, but have you seen the new Quantum video?
Exactly. Now it's very impressive, but it didn't seem that big a deal then. So maybe 2 years from now, we'll change your mind.
At first, I was looking at it, I was like, is that a person in a robot suit? It's like the movements, except for when it walks, you can tell it's a robot when it walks. But the hand movements and everything are insane. Okay. Well, in any event, like, come on, like, don't waste any goodwill that you might have.
Yeah, it may have been premature.
Exactly. It's just like, okay. In any event. Let's do some rapid fire on a few of these. Snapchat, what's going on there?
Yep, Snapchat Plus, they've been putting out generative AI features for a while now, and their latest is going for images and making synthetic images part of their the conversation you can have with people, which is going to be necessary since social media is definitely going to have a lot more of synthetic creations on it.
Okay, and it shows how far we've come because we probably would have spent several minutes talking about this.
Yeah, it doesn't seem as impressive anymore.
And it's less than a minute today. All right, so Meta.
And it's exactly what I'm talking about. It's Meta put out a bunch of new features and updated a bunch of their generative AI tools. The Meta AI chatbot, their version of ChatGPT, especially, is now much more integrated into Facebook and Instagram. They want people to use it to craft their posts, and they want people to engage with it and through it to other people, because again, they don't want people to ask ChatGPT how to write a Facebook post. They want people to ask Meta AI how to write a Facebook post.
Yep. Seems logical to me. All right. And actually, this is one of the things we'd said like a long time ago. It's like Meta's, why are they doing all this AI research and those types of things? Well, one of the first things, they're just going to roll it into their own products. They've got big distribution, so just use that, add features, as opposed to like using some third party. Now, we have Getty Images and Runway teamed up. You talked about this. No more lawsuits not that there aren't even that many lawsuits as it is, but no more lawsuits in the generative image space.
Yeah, I mean, because the options have been for synthetic media creators, developers, to say either risk it or limit themselves to purely public domain training, or, and this is the third option, partner with a company that does have license to tons of media, and Getty is definitely one of them. They started out being very against offering generative, synthetic images. Now they're working with Runway, who are another one of the advanced, especially on the consumer side, synthetic video creators, and they're going to get even better now because they're going to be able to train with all the Getty's licensed images and create essentially a Getty specific synthetic media generator. So it's going to be potentially very very helpful for the developers who want to push forward in the synthetic video and synthetic media in general.
And if anybody wants to look at a Synthetia post from, I think it was November of 2022, when Getty was saying, this is all terrible, we're going to stop this, and lawsuits everywhere, I think we predicted that they would come on board because the freight train is coming. So you had another story, which I thought was, I don't know if you've written about this yet, but I just want to talk about it a little bit. McDonald's tapped generative AI as restaurants turn to automation.
Yeah, it's sort of a perennial piece about McDonald's, where they keep piloting and testing AI for their drive-thrus, for the restaurants in general. They'll test it out, it'll go well, they'll deal with inevitable lawsuits, and then they sort of back off from it. They partner with a startup, they buy the startup, they basically partner with IBM, and the people from that startup then leave to do their own thing. This is the next stage in that, where now they're like, all right, well, maybe now we'll have the tools where all of the money people behind McDonald's, who make these big, decisions affecting billions of dollars of commerce, will say, okay, this is the tool that we can use to save money, to improve our customer service, and make a standard element of the McDonald's experience. And we'll see. I think generally speaking that it will. I just don't know if this is that moment, or if they're gonna get scared again and back off.
I don't know. I mean, there's also data from Payments did some research, and the expectation from quick serve restaurants is that about 51% of tasks will be automated within the next decade using AI. So it seems like another freight train. It's just like inevitable. They can't staff. They can't staff them. So it's not about displacing or just efficiency. It's about like keeping the lights on. You also had a story about Mastercard and the shopping assistant Muse.
Yeah, and again, it's exactly that. I mean, people are understandably wary of incorporating new technology into their everyday experiences, commerce experiences. But once upon a time, the idea of asking an AI for help figuring out what to buy would have seemed not a good idea. And now Mastercard, a pillar of the financial community, is saying, yeah, when you do your shopping, interact with this AI, talk to it about who you are, what you're interested in buying, and we'll help you figure out the best way to shop, and obviously offer deals through if you use your Mastercard.
Absolutely. Yeah. Perfect example of all the different ways that this is going to manifest. And I think it's really clever by dynamic yield and Mastercard to put that out, at least to gather data. Like even if it doesn't become that popular, they'll gather a lot of data, which would be useful for them. Because that's really, I mean, are they a technology company? Are they a data company? That's a good question. Let's talk about generative AI in the world. And by the way, folks, let us know if you're out there and if you have winners or losers for the week. Just say a quick hi in the chat if you get a chance. So generative AI in the world, EU AI Act was approved shortly after midnight Central European time on Friday. So there wasn't a lot of news cycle. And basically they haven't published anything. They're not really going to publish anything other than a couple of press releases out of the Parliament and European Commission. They have any details for months, but there was an actually very interesting press conference, which I was listening to late Friday night. It was not after midnight my time because I was in the US, but in any event, so the Trilogue Commission, the three governing bodies of the EU came together and have an agreement. A couple of interesting things, banned applications, biometric categorization, predictive policing. These are things that probably won't surprise people based on some of the conversations, although there was a difference between the Parliament and the Commission in particular around how much they could do there. And there are a couple things around that were clear from the discussion in the press conference is that there's actually not going to be that many large language models caught up in the foundation models aren't going to be caught up in it's mostly going to be the applications. There will be a few frontier models like GPT-4 that will certainly qualify. And it's not clear how many of the others that will. But there's the one other thing I'll say is that they kept talking about this idea of balancing regulation, consumer protection with innovation. So somebody got to everybody because they weren't really talking about innovation 4 months ago, but they specifically called out protecting the open source community. Yann LeCun, who's French originally, from Meta, one of the 3 Turing Award winners, has been really big on this, that the regulations that they were proposing would basically eliminate open source. Mistral, which we talked about, is a French company. They want French innovation. And the commission is made up by the heads of state of the member countries. And, I can imagine that the government of France doesn't want their star generative AI business like being cut off by European regulation. Any comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, we saw, or the European countries saw what happened when they were regulating around voice assistants, and you could debate whether or not the level of regulation was good or not good, but it did definitely have the effect of slowing down and limiting, and sometimes potentially being certainly a reason that attempts to make European smart speakers and voice assistants independent of Amazon or Google just didn't really
they're all gone.
pan out. Yeah,
they're all
exactly.
Gone. Some of them are like customer service bots now.
Yeah, and we've talked about there's a couple of Mistral, Alfalfa. There's a couple out there who believe their philosophical point is that they can achieve all of these consumer protection and general regulatory necessities without stifling that innovation. And I think that's why the issue, the question of where these rules apply is so narrowly tailored. So it really will be about the companies that are, American and maybe a few Asian companies that are so giant that really don't have a precise analog in any European nation.
If you watch that press conference, it was almost as if the EU is like super pro business. And I know that there's arguments to be made on either side, but more of a regular.
But we know that they're not bluffing. I mean, Italy banned ChatGPT for a couple of weeks. Like they do take it seriously.
Yeah, and then there was one member of parliament who was there who was like, he gave some nods to business, but he was really much more focused on restrictions, whereas the other people seemed to be more focused on the business interest, which I thought was interesting because you don't normally see that out of Europe. So final story for the day before we do winners and losers of the week. OpenAI just did a content deal with Axel Springer. Axel Springer said earlier the year, the CEO said, hey, of course, there's going to be some AI is going to replace some news jobs. We don't need as many copywriters. We don't need as many editors. Probably this is going to happen. And they just did a deal. Now this deal has a couple of elements to it. One is that Axel Springer's news data, images, video is going to be available to OpenAI for training models in the future, which is good. A nice curated data set of high quality that they can rely on. And Axel Springer publication information is going to show up in ChatGPT responses.
Yeah, and not just show it, and not just showing up as a reference, but even paywalled stories will be able, yes. ChatGPT will be able to access them, which is potentially big. I mean, some of those publications are the biggest publications in Germany, and some of them are internationally huge, like Politico and Business Insider. From the standpoint of journalism, I mean, there's obviously there are concerns, but this kind of integration was somewhat inevitable. It's just a question of whether a partnership like this will either make fewer people want to pay for the news, / will it be like a Google listing where publications that aren't part of Axel Springer get shut out by ChatGPT because its first course of response is always going to be an Axel Springer publication.
Yeah, and I haven't seen that yet. I was trying to trick it into ChatGPT and to give me an Axel Springer news story yesterday. I couldn't get any to come up. Well, I wasn't trying to trick it. I was trying to see if it would, but I did write things that I knew Axel Springer publications have written about. So yeah, we'll see how it is. We've seen in the past there have been attempts to do news aggregation, like pay one price, get access to lots of news. Those have all failed. The news industry is under tremendous financial pressure. Some of it's exogenous, but a lot of it of their own making. That's a conversation for another day, because of I think it's largely of mismanagement and hubris again. But you sort of move on. But I thought it was really interesting, new revenue model, and so this might be actually a way to save. to save some of the publications by doing a revenue sharing agreement, kind of like ChatGPT becomes the information version of Spotify. Yeah,
although ask musical artists how they feel about that, and journalists would probably start getting nervous. The revenue sharing is interesting because we don't know any details. We don't know who's paying whom, if either side is paying the other, or if it's purely a structural agreement, and then with a plan for future revenue. Because obviously OpenAI is getting not just the news, but also the data, and Axel Springer is getting more of a chance to spread its news and potentially be a part of how the most popular generative AI chatbot works.
But the thing that they did say, from the release, this marks a significant step in both companies' commitment to leverage AI for enhancing content experiences and creating new financial opportunities that support a sustainable future for journalism. So I think you're right. We don't know exactly what the terms are, but clearly Axel Springer's gone in assuming they're going to make money off of this.
I will say, someone who's been in the world of media, and obviously has many friends in the world of media, anytime a media company mentions sustainable future, that means layoffs. So we'll see.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Okay, everybody. This is Gain, Generative AI News Rundown. I'm Brett Kinsella. I'm the founder of VoiceBot.ai and Synthetia. This is Eric Schwartz, my colleague, head writer at VoiceBot.ai. Eric, who's your winner for the week?
I think I'm going to have to say the world of voice AI. There was a surprising amount of new funding and new projects involving voice AI. We mentioned a few of them, and I think that the voice AI seemed like a little bit left behind during the frenzy of text and images for generative AI. But I think that that's shifting, and audio and voice are now very much part of that space, just as much as images and other synthetic media are.
All right, yeah, that's good. I'm going to pick Mistral as my winner. They got a couple pieces of good news. EU AI Act probably is just not going to regulate them at all, based on what it looks like from the outline. So that'll allow them to keep moving forward in a meaningful way. And they raised a lot of money and put out what looks like a pretty amazing small language model with, sort of novel-ish technology that's not widespread. So they're my winner this week. Who do you have for a loser?
Well, we didn't even get a chance to touch on it, but I do have to say, I think journalists as a whole, partly because of just uncertainty. I mean, what does it mean for news photographers with the Getty deal? What does it mean for reporters with the Axel Springer deal? And what does it mean when the people behind Sports Illustrated feel free to just create AI articles and AI authors and play around with them without ever mentioning to anyone and make the entire publication look bad? I mean, some executives' heads have rolled, but as a whole, people are not going to be turning to, not that necessarily people are looking at Sports Illustrated these days for deeply reported articles, but it degrades the whole brand, really.
But they totally, they created fake people.
They had not only created fake people, but would then decide to create a new fake person and put that byline over all the old ones. It was a we talk about Google's marketing division having some issues. This whoever was making all those decisions could not have done more wrong if they had made a deliberate effort to get fired.
Yeah, the cover up was probably worse than the original sin, but maybe both were bad enough. In terms of losers this week, I think it's particularly like Cohere, AI21, some of the other who want to be general purpose foundation model in the proprietary space isn't the alternative to OpenAI, maybe even Anthropic. If Google does have a really powerful tool in Gemini, it's going to get a second look from a lot of people. It's going to be harder for them to compete. I think Anthropic's probably okay. It's got enough momentum, but I think the other players in the space that want to compete in the general purpose segment, it just made it a lot harder this week.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, folks, that's game for this week. I'm Brett Kinsella. That's Eric Schwartz. That's Generative AI News Rundown. Consider yourself informed. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and let us know what you thought.